Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to today's program, What to Do After Dobbs, Access to Reproductive Healthcare and How to Help. Sponsored by the Women in Law section, the Committee on Families and the Law, and the Committee on Continuing Legal Education of the New York State Bar Association. If you are not a member of NYSBA or the Women in Law section, feel free to visit our website for more information on how to join. Today's program will run from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. And during today's program, if you would like to pose a question to the speakers, please use the Q&A tab in the Zoom portal, not the chat function. It is my pleasure at this time to now introduce the chair of the Women in Law section, Cheryl Gallard, for opening remarks. Cheryl?
Thank you so much, Ernesto. Thank you to our speakers today, and thank you to everyone who is joining us. We welcome you to this important program. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the Women in Law section, and I certainly hope that you will all join our section and join the New York State Bar Association if you're not already members. So our section has over 600 members, women and men, in New York and throughout the world. We are dedicated to addressing critical issues that impact attorneys and women under the law generally. So some of the issues that impact attorneys are your career development, networking, and leadership skills. And the general issues include, of course, reproductive rights, voting rights, the needs of underserved populations, paid leave, equal pay, sexual harassment. These are really just a few of all the many topics that we deal with. We have more than a dozen different committees that are part of our section. And so there are more than a dozen different ways for you to get involved, depending on your interests. I'm just going to highlight a few. We have our Emerging Lawyers Committee, which handles topics and issues and CLEs and programs for emerging lawyers. And I'm mentioning that one because the chair, Christina Bedell, is someone you'll meet in a couple of minutes. We have our annual meeting and programming committee, which puts together programs such as this one. We have a wonderful book club that will meet again in September. We have more programs, of course, coming up on the post-Dobbs repercussions and the decision. We have our Women on the Move program coming up in October, and of course, the annual meeting of the New York State Bar Association in January. We have our Legislative Affairs Committee, which looks into legislation being proposed on a state and federal level and comments on it and encourages lobbying efforts by the New York State Bar Association when appropriate. And so we have a lot of different things going on. We also present 2 awards each year to trailblazers in the profession. That is the Ruth G. Shapiro Award and the K. Crawford Murray Award. We have our journal, Wills Connect. The current issue is going to press right now as we speak. But if you're interested in writing any articles or making any contributions or getting in touch with any of us about anything for our next winter edition, please get in touch with us. We're always welcome to have contributions and articles in our journal. For more information about anything that we're doing or anything I've talked about, please check out our website, the New York State Bar Association Women in the Law section's website, and you can see it there on your screen. If you don't already know, we issued a statement regarding the Dobbs decision, and that's highlighted there. And so you can read it there, along with other reports and other things that we're doing and upcoming programming. We get emails from the New York State Bar Association about upcoming events. There is Communities, which is our listserv for anyone who's a member to get reports and issues on upcoming events and notifications. And of course, you're always welcome to contact me, to contact Ernesto, to contact anyone from our section if you'd like to get involved, and I certainly hope that you will. We do have another program, which I'm going to mention, which is coming up on Monday, also on Dobbs' historical context and future implications. And we have Catherine Weiss and Professor Catherine Franke are going to be speaking then about the constitutional law issues involved with Dobbs. And so we certainly hope you will join us for that free webinar on Monday, the 18th. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Christina Bedell. As I mentioned, she is the chair of our Emerging Lawyers Committee as part of the Women in Law section. She is currently an Assistant Attorney General with the New York State Attorney General's Office, where she represents the state of New York in state and federal courts. She has been awarded awards for her special prosecution work on behalf of the Attorney General's Office, and also awards by Hofstra Law School, where she is an adjunct professor of law. And so we're thrilled that she's here to join us to moderate this program. Her entire bio and the bios of our speakers today are in the materials from the website where you registered. And so if you'd like more details, feel free to look at their bios there. And so now it is my pleasure and honor to hand over the virtual microphone to Christina. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. By now, we're familiar with, and we may probably still be reeling from, the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs. And today we ask ourselves an important question. What next? What do we do after Dobbs? It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel who will delve into this for us today. Jennifer Levy is the first Deputy Attorney General of the state of New York. She oversees the office's social, criminal, and economic justice divisions, its 13 regional offices, and the State Council Division. Prior to her role as First Deputy AG, Jennifer was the supervising attorney for the Civil Law Reform Unit at the Legal Aid Society. And before the Legal Aid Society, she served as the General Counsel in charge of litigation for the Public Advocate for the City of New York, Letitia James. Jennifer was the Director of Bronx Legal Services from 2011 to 2014, and the Director of several Brooklyn Legal Services New York City programs from 2008 to 2011. Jennifer has specialized in complex litigation involving immigrants' rights, housing, child welfare, disability rights, eminent domain, and education law. Jennifer has also taught land use at Columbia's School of Architecture and Planning and has served on the boards of Housing, Court Answers, and the Bushwick Housing Independence Project. She is a graduate of NYU School of Law and McGill University. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today. Claudia Hammerman is a litigation partner at Paul West Rifkin, Wharton and Garrison, LLP. She has extensive experience handling a broad range of litigation and regulatory matters with particular emphasis defending financial institutions and corporations in complex securities and commercial matters, as well as representing clients before the SEC, the Department of Justice, and federal and state regulatory authorities. Her pro bono commitments have included representing the last abortion clinics in Missouri and Mississippi in challenging various TRAP laws and bans, including, along with the Center for Reproductive Rights, in the recent Dobbs case. Claudia has been selected by her peers for the Best Lawyers in America and Super Lawyers, and by Benchmark Litigation as a litigation star, and is one of the top 250 women in litigation. She received her BA magna cum laude from Haverford College in 1987 and her JD magna cum laude from Harvard Law School in 1991, where she served on the law review. She is also clerk for Judge John Newman, former Chief Judge of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Thank you, Claudia. And thank you to both of our panelists for your time today. Now, to start us off, Claudia, why don't you talk to us a little bit about abortion and its access in New York? Is abortion legal and accessible in the state of New York?
Emphatically, yes. I'm delighted to be in New York, where I think New York has been on the vanguard and taken action to guarantee that abortion is legal and protected in New York. And New York can be a haven to all pregnant persons seeking to control their bodies and their lives. The 2019 Reproductive Health Act recognized abortion as a fundamental right. And New York healthcare providers can provide abortion care up to 14 weeks from commencement of a pregnancy, which, unlike what reproductive rights practitioners are used to hearing, is not measured from the last menstrual period, but instead is measured from implantation. So essentially 24 weeks is really 27 or 28 weeks. Moreover, you can go later than that if the fetus is not viable, or if the life or health, including mental health, of the woman is at stake.
Now, in addition to the Reproductive Health Act of 2019, New York also has a recent legislation that protects New Yorkers. Now, Jennifer, can you talk to us about these new laws to further protect abortion and reproductive rights for all of New Yorkers?
I certainly can. And I just want to echo what Claudia said about being proud to be a New Yorker. I think we really are at the vanguard of passing laws that seek to protect New York providers and people seeking reproductive health care in New York from repercussions of the laws that have been passed by hostile states. And we really are leading the nation in this type of legislation, and have reason to be very proud. There were 6 pieces of legislation that were passed in the last legislative session, all again aimed at protecting providers in New York and people seeking a reproductive health care in New York from the reach of the laws enacted by hostile states seeking to impose civil or criminal liability extraterritorially. The first prohibits extradition or arrest of anyone accused of a crime for providing an abortion in the state of New York in accordance with the laws of the state of New York. It also purports to prohibit law enforcement from assisting in other states' investigations of abortions provided in the state. The second establishes a cause of action for unlawful interference with protected rights, including reproductive rights. Interference includes bringing a civil or criminal case against someone seeking or providing an abortion. So that piece of legislation is potentially a slap back against actions brought in other states. The third prohibits medical insurance companies from taking any adverse action against providers as a result of those providers providing legal reproductive health services in the state of New York. The fourth prohibits professional misconduct charges against licensed medical professionals providing reproductive health care services in a state where those services are illegal. The fifth adds reproductive health providers and their patients to the list of entities entitled to opt into a Department of State program that allows them to keep their addresses out of certain public documents. And finally, the sixth authorizes the Commissioner of Health to conduct a study and issue a report on unmet needs in reproductive health in New York and the impact of crisis pregnancy centers. There's a link to the text of each of these pieces of legislation on the New York State AG's reproductive health landing page, which Ernesto was kind enough to post to the chat in case anybody would like to look at the actual legislation. One piece of legislation that didn't pass was legislation that was aimed at creating an abortion fund that would be administered by the state of New York. But while that legislation didn't pass, Governor Hochul did announce that she would put $25 million towards an abortion provider support fund, 10 million of which would go to increasing security for abortion providers, having heard of the concern, which we now know is real, that there would be threats to security following the Dobbs decision and increased protest activity that could verge on a violent nature. The first round of those funds were given out a couple of days ago. And finally, in special session, the legislature passed the first round of an equality amendment to the New York State Constitution, which would guarantee, among other things, freedom from interference with healthcare autonomy. It has to pass the legislature a second time, and then it could potentially be on the ballot as a referendum in 2024. Claudia, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I think you covered it. But I, everyone should be really proud because this is really the best bundle of legislation that's out there.
So now we can turn to the federal level.
So let's talk about the federal level, and briefly, Jennifer or Claudia, can you fill us in about what's being done on the federal level?
Yeah, I'll start. On July 8th, President Biden issued an executive order, which does a couple of things. It directs Health and Human Services to identify actions that would increase access to abortion, particularly medical abortion, and also talks about increasing outreach efforts and looking at a law called EMTALA, which is a law that requires Medicare participating hospitals to stabilize patients appearing in an emergency. I'll get back to that in a minute. It also announces that the Attorney General and the Counsel to the President is going to convene pro bono attorneys, bar associations, and the like to encourage lawyers to represent and assist patients, providers, and third parties. So something I think that's similar to the initiative that New York announced a couple of weeks ago. It also directs the AG, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the FTC, and HHS to consider measures to increase security for patients and providers, which includes looking at data security and the use of HIPAA in that context. It also creates a DOJ, HHS Gender Policy Council Task Force to coordinate these efforts. They're going to look at regulatory changes, and they're going to coordinate with states to provide technical assistance concerning, this is a quote from it, federal constitutional protections to states seeking to afford legal protection to out-of-state patients and providers. And I think the backdrop there is the reluctance to use the federal courts to vindicate rights. There's more of a look at the state courts and how we can safeguard the rights that exist within states like ours that continue to protect access to reproductive health care. For their part, HHS has already issued a guidance declaring that the law that I referred to a few minutes ago, EMTALA, preempts state laws that prohibit abortions in cases where women need access to emergency care. So if a woman had, for instance, an incomplete abortion and sought emergency services, HHS's position is that the law that requires hospitals to stabilize people appearing in emergency preempts the state law prohibiting abortions. I will just make a mention that these moves do fall short of what advocates have been urging. They have been urging that the federal government issue a health emergency that would trigger the PrEP Act and potentially allow the federal government to preempt state laws to the extent that they impede access to medication abortion. I don't know, Claudia, do you have any further comment?
No, although the EMTALA Act, you would think that the Hippocratic Oath would compel helping a woman with in those situations, but whatever. We're in hostile terrain.
Now, just to go back to the Equal Rights Amendment to the New York State Constitution, Jennifer, can you just talk a little bit about why this is an important addition to the state constitution?
It's an important addition to the state constitution. It's being urged across the country by advocates as a protection against fluctuations in administration to really enshrine the right to reproductive autonomy in the Constitution rather than having it be dependent on state legislation. And like I said a few minutes ago, there is increasing looking to the states to protect these rights and not to rely on federal jurisprudence. So it's a move to states' rights. Claudia, do you want to elaborate on that?
No, I think, law firms historically, have partnered with reproductive rights organizations to represent abortion clinics in the hostile states. Now, after Dobbs, that's what we're left with, state law and state constitutions. And we are fighting to keep those clinics open and operating for as long as possible, but it's a rearguard action not likely to be successful in those states. And while it's almost impossible to conceive of New York passing anti-abortion legislation, it was impossible for me to conceive of the Dobbs opinion. So it just makes sense to lock these things up and enshrine them in constitutions.
Thank you both. Now, we've talked about the Reproductive Act of 2019. We've talked about the new legislation, and we've talked about the federal protections that are also in play. But that's not all in New York. We also are fortunate that the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, has formed a new Pro Bono Task Force. And Jennifer, can you talk to us a little bit about the composition of this task force?
Sure. 2 weeks ago or so, we announced a task force in partnership with 24 law firms and 8 reproductive rights organizations. I'll say that since then, we've had a lot of outreach. It's looking more like it's around 50 firms who are interested in participating, and several additional not-for-profits as well. I'm going to hand it over to Claudia because Paul Weiss has been the leading partner from the law firm community. But before that, I just want to say that I think intrinsic to the success and integrity of this effort has been ensuring that the not-for-profits who have been in the trenches and doing this litigation and doing this representation, for all of these years are working with us, hand in glove. Including the Center for Reproductive Rights, which is with Paul Weiss and the Attorney General's office, is the steering committee. Claudia?
I'll just jump in to say that it's been really satisfying to see that, kind of after we've gotten rid of our primal scream of pain and outrage, there are just so many lawyers that are looking to try to help. And, the Attorney General had the foresight to put this all together. As I mentioned before, the model has been that law firms have partnered with the true experts, the reproductive rights organizations, to represent specific abortion clinics in hostile states. Well, now the crosshairs are on our own New York abortion providers and New York funders, and they're not used to being in the crosshairs, and we've never been partnered up with them. And so the New York task force, has jumped on this and is creating the kind of structure so we can, make informed outreach and provide help where help has not been needed before.
So what kind of help will the task force be providing? And Jennifer, why don't you start telling us a little bit about that kind of help that this task force is going to assist with?
So the task force was formed to provide a free hotline and potentially anonymous, depending on the needs and desires of the caller, to give legal advice and potentially representation to 4 broad categories of people or entities. New Yorkers who have questions about their rights as New Yorkers. So the question that we started out with, in the wake of the Dobbs decision, there were people who thought that abortion was immediately illegal across the country. So just giving that basic advice to New Yorkers with questions about their rights. New York providers with questions about providing reproductive health services to New Yorkers and non-New Yorkers. Entities that provide support to those seeking abortions in New York, like abortion funds. And institutions like employers and educational institutions based in New York wanting to adopt policies that would permit employees and or students to access reproductive health services.
Now, this is a toll-free number. Can you please share with us that number?
If you just go to the link that Ernesto posted, or Christina, you could say the number.
Sure. So the hotline number is 212-899-5567. And Ernesto will also be posting the link, which is https://ag.ny.gov/reproductive health. And that's reproductive health, one word.
So I'll talk a little bit, if you want, Christina, about the structure of it, about how it works. We imagined that in addition to brief advice, there would be a percentage of callers who were off-ramped for more in-depth risk assessments and potentially future representation. So in kind of structuring the volunteers, we had firms who signed up to volunteer, sign up for subcommittees that would do a number of things. They would establish, they would create a script for frequently asked questions and responses to them that were vetted by the not-for-profit partners who were working with us. They would volunteer to represent patients and providers in civil or criminal proceedings. They would do research and provide advice or representation on transactional matters involving not-for-profits and universities. They would provide advice to institutional clients like employers, like I mentioned before, to come up with best practices and guidance for them and their employees. And then we also have an impact litigation committee, which I think is self-explanatory. And then finally, there is a coordination committee that has the members of the task force coordinating with other AG's offices, the Department of Justice and Bar Association. Maybe Claudia, maybe this is a good time for Claudia to talk about what we've been seeing, if that makes sense to you, Christina.
Yes, absolutely. Claudia, why don't you talk to us about what you've seen so far on the hotline?
So, happily, we have not seen too many New Yorkers who are confused about their rights. So that's good. I know that there have been a lot of public announcements that, you know, have served the purpose of dispelling some of the confusion that might be out there. Unfortunately, what we have received is what we expected is calls from providers who are now finding themselves in this maelstrom of devious and overreaching laws and hostility, and really not knowing if they are protected, if they, you know, what if they want, you know, what if they provide an abortion to a woman from Texas and then want to attend their nephew's graduation at the University of Texas in Austin. You know, it's very, you know, these are people that are absolutely, you know, justice warriors, and they do not want to stop what they are doing, but they're unused to being, you know, terrified. So we are getting a lot of calls from providers, calls from funders. Most of these require kind of, you know, individualized analysis. And frankly, given the temperature out there and the incredible inventiveness of these hostile forces, often the only way to kind of bring everybody's temperature down and give them comfort is not just advice, but also a promise of pro bono representation should things go absolutely sideways.
Now, what if I don't live in the state of New York and I'm in another one of the hostile states? May I call the hotline as well?
Absolutely. If you are expecting to travel to New York or want to think about traveling to New York to, you know, obtain an abortion, we can, you know, the website that the AG has put out already has a lot of resources, but if you happen to call the hotline, we will also give you the resources for, you know, the scheduling with a clinic or getting in touch for funding of the procedure and or funding of your travel and lodging to get here if you need that.
And if I don't speak English, do I need a translator in order to call the hotline?
Remarkably, we are able to, you know, the hotline is mandated, it is available in 12 different languages.
That's great. Now, I know, Jennifer, you talked about that it was anonymous unless you're comfortable providing information. Is there any information that's required for me if I'm calling into this hotline?
It's designed so that you can call and just leave your phone number to be called back. But I think, and you know, it might be that the makeup of callers changes as we move along, and we will see it shift to more of an individual advice. But like Claudia was saying, at this point, we're getting more calls from kind of institutional client or potential clients so it's becoming a more in-depth traditional representation off-ramp model.
Claudia, I'd like to turn our attention to the response from law firms following Dobbs. Can you talk to us about, what law firms are doing following the Dobbs decision? And of course, we do know that they're contributing to this task force, as Paul Weiss is. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we've been incredibly pleased to see the response from law firms, and really that's what we need. We need the muscle of law firms to support the incredible work that the reproductive rights organizations have done, and the AG has organized us in such a way that we can provide that. But we have, I hesitate to use the word skittish, because they're not skittish. They're absolutely committed, but very, very nervous providers and funders who really do need the advice and assurance of pro bono support from both the reproductive rights organizations and law firms that are going to put the muscle and the resources behind that should anything go south.
I'm just going to add, I think Claudia made this point, but I'm going to just say it a slightly different way. One of the things that is important about having this kind of separate source for representation is that if you're a lawyer who's only telling a provider how to avoid liability, you might not be capturing what the provider actually wants, which is, these are mission-oriented institutions that some of them may want to incur risk to continue doing what they are so dedicated to doing. And so that's why it involves an individualized assessment, which doesn't follow a typical kind of avoidance of liability at all costs model.
Now, we've seen the Sidley situation in Texas in the news. And Claudia, can you talk to us about what's been going on in Texas with regards to the law firm Sidley? And do we have to worry about that in New York?
Well, as most people know, the completely misnamed Texas Freedom Caucus had sent a letter to Sidley, probably because their chair is situated in Texas, but I would expect that they'd be sending the same letter to any law firm that is in Texas, and basically saber rattling about their promise to provide access to reproductive health care, including travel benefits, and to their employees, and for their continued work in representing abortion clinics. And it's saber rattling that, thank goodness, I don't think a law firm is going to be intimidated by. And, many law firms have offered the same types of benefits. I don't expect that they will cave, and I'm hoping that everyone on this call will keep them from caving. Women represent, 50% of your talent pool, and I hope none of us are going to abandon, our sisters or others that can get pregnant. But I do think that we can anticipate that this same, that anti-abortion forces are emboldened right now. They'll make all kinds of threats, and this kind of gets back to what Jennifer was saying, which is, we're lawyers, we're used to being conservative. If we were to tell to tell clinics how to protect themselves. It would be not to provide abortions to those traveling from out of state. Well, that is contrary to mission. That's contrary to their principles. And so we have to provide them with the best advice that we can, the most current risk assessments that they can, and, the comfort that should the worst come to the worst, we'll be there. I'm sure law firms and corporations that are, that have provided these benefits to their employees are hopefully going to stand their ground. We're hoping this will be like, the North Carolina bathroom bill. This is offensive. And we really hope that both national law firms and corporate America stands up for, people that can become pregnant.
What other legal protections are in the works? And either Claudia, Jennifer, or both rather can fill us in about some other things that are kind of coming down the pipeline when it comes to legal protections and reproductive rights.
Jennifer, do you have
Have kind of
privileged insight?
yes, I do think there will be some chapter amendments that will probably strengthen the laws in New York to some extent. I think that's likely. I also think that we're at the beginning here. This is going to be a long road, and I think we're just at the beginning of realizing our potential to collaborate and collaborate between the blue states to form a kind of defensive wall. And I think that's sort of where we're hoping this heads.
Now, ways to help and get involved. Following Dobbs, many of us and people we know immediately wanted to spring into action. And Jennifer, as attorneys, what can we do to help?
Well, as attorneys, the hotline is geared towards firm participation. It doesn't have its own malpractice insurance or anything, but there are other organizations that have been doing this work for a very long time. One of the chief ones is called If, When, How, and they coordinate pro bono assistance to people facing criminal penalties, and they are doing a training next week in collaboration with the National Association for Pregnant Women on representation in those criminal proceedings. So that's one way for individual attorneys to plug in.
And Claudia, what about on the law firm, and how can law firms help?
Well, I think coming out of this task force, we are going to have a lot of entities that are in need of pro bono representation, that are, really there on the front lines, providing the reproductive services, either the providers themselves or abortion funds or logistics and travel assistance. And these entities are new to feeling in peril. And, I think that we will have plenty of clients for any law firm that wants to provide, pro bono counseling in this area where a fundamental freedom, in my mind, is at stake.
Now, if I am not an attorney, maybe I am an organization or an individual, are there opportunities for me to help as well? Well, Claudia, why don't you start off?
Sure, I'll start. Nobody really wants to hear this, but really what you need to do is give. You need to give to these reproductive rights organizations. You need to give to the abortion funds, and you need to give to candidates who can Right now, this is going to need to be fixed legislatively. There are a lot of important races that, in even these hostile states that are important. There are races that are important to keep Congress and to prevent, the Armageddon of a complete federal ban. So, we're lawyers, but, it's actually our lucre and not our talents that is, most in need here. And, we should give, and we should vote.
Absolutely. Now, Jennifer, what about from you? How else can we help, and what do you think the greatest need is right now?
Well, I know we keep saying the same thing over and over, but I think the greatest need from our perspective really is to represent these individual providers in New York and in other states where abortion is being provided. And I think that's not our typical pro bono model in crises or humanitarian crises or social justice crises like this. And so it takes a little bit of mental adjustment to get there. And I'll just add on to what Claudia said about firm participation in the hotline. I talked about all the different committees that are doing a variety of background work for the task force. And so, I mean, lawyers with many different talents and specialties can be plugged in. I mean, they can do transactional work. There's need for real estate attorneys. There's a need for everybody.
I guess just to jump in there, I mean, we have interesting, there's interesting work going on about, proxy season is going to come up, and there's issues of can we have advise companies with respect to the kind of the kind of things they might face with regard to abortion, and maybe organize good things that they should be facing with respect to abortion. There's questions about advising different companies and entities with respect to their healthcare plans. So it's not just litigation, it is transactional as well.
Now, I know we're going to leave a couple of minutes for questions, but I just want to thank both of our panelists very much for all of the information and for all that you're doing in life after Dobbs, and for spearheading this task force, and for firms such as yours, Claudius, for joining in on the cause. So thank you on behalf of NISBA and the Women in Law section. We are going to open it up for questions, and we do have a few in the chat box. But before we do so, are there any lasting thoughts or words or things you want to get across? I know you've mentioned throughout this about getting involved and helping, but anything else you'd like to add, please do so.
I realized I didn't thank you at the top of the program, but thank you to my colleague Christina Singh Badal, who is with me at the Attorney General's office, and thank you to Cheryl for inviting us to participate. Thank you to Ernesto for setting it up, and in particular, thank you to Claudia, who, as I said at the beginning, has been a real partner in working on this really, I think, promising and cutting edge model.
Thank you. Claudia, any lasting words?
Well, I would say, as a woman who can credit my exercise of my constitutional right at that time to have an abortion, and the effect that it had on my life, and what it allowed me to accomplish, including being a partner in an eminent law firm and a mother at the right time and to the best of my ability. I would hope that women who, like me, have had an abortion will be more comfortable talking about it, because this shouldn't be a source of shame. And until we become comfortable and become leaders of people who can destigmatize this necessary form of healthcare, you know, it will continue to be marginalized. So that's the last bit.
Thank you both. So now let's turn to the chat box. And the first question that I have is, are there ways to provide pro bono services to women seeking abortions in New York for New York attorneys who reside in another state? And this particular person lives in North Carolina and would love to assist pro bono, but there are restrictions that are placed practicing under a New York license when you're out of state. And Jennifer or Claudia, either one can jump in.
Well, this is a complicated question that may be beyond my purview, and seems like we have to do an assessment. I would wonder that there aren't, that there may actually be things in North Carolina that organizations that are helping women travel, maybe not to New York, but to the nearest states available, to basically, you know, to get an abortion and control their bodies and their destinies.
I'm also seeing a number of questions that seem to indicate that I gave that one resource, which is If, When, How, and they're doing a training for having, you know, criminal representation, and they work with solo practitioners, and we have not done that yet here, but that's we just started 2 weeks ago, and it could be that as we move along, we will be able to incorporate solo practitioners into some of the background work that is happening, more transactional work as opposed to the representation that is coming out of the hotline at the moment.
Now, another question is, do you think rights to contraception are at risk in light of the Dobbs reasoning? Does anyone want to tackle this one?
Well, if you look at the methodology, the originalist methodology, a lot of rights would be at risk. You know, essentially, they want to define the scope of liberty as those traditions that were in place at a time when women were chattel and couldn't vote. They were the property of their wives, of their husbands. You know, Blacks had just been enfranchised, but basically based on, you know, harassment and violence, they weren't voting either. So that is the tradition that we're supposed to hearken back to in defining liberty. Well, there was no right to contraception. There was no right to contraception even for married people. There was, you know, no right to same-sex intimacy. There was no right to same-sex marriage. There were some hints in the decision that, well, you know, maybe the stare decisis analysis might be different in those situations. Who knows? You know, I don't think that their stare decisis analysis was correct in the in looking at Roe and Casey, but they held out that hope, and you know, some things may be a bridge too far even for this incredibly activist court.
Thank you, Claudia. Now, another question is, while big law firms are set up to engage in task forces, how can solo practitioners, small firms, professors, and other attorneys help? Are there opportunities for those attorneys who likely do not have the resources to engage in full representation to assist? Claudia, do you want to tackle that? Jennifer, maybe do you want to start?
There are places for those who are not equipped to engage in full-on representation to assist with this task force, for sure. We anticipate doing a lot of work that doesn't involve litigation, and there's a lot of research that's going into a bunch of the different questions that we're exploring. So certainly people who are with small firms can volunteer to assist on the task force.
Now, for organizations that want to provide travel assistance funds for those seeking reproductive care out of state, how do you recommend that they protect the privacy of their employees, both to avoid legal issues, but also to encourage employees to feel comfortable coming forward to request that sort of assistance?
That sounds like a great question for the hotline.
Yeah, absolutely. That may require an individualized analysis. There are also resources on the Attorney General's website about how to protect privacy in communications, for individuals about their seeking and obtaining an abortion. But call the hotline.
And I think now is a good time to also remind everyone that, if there is some sort of specific question or scenario that they wish to discuss, the hotline would probably be the best place to call, correct?
Yes.
Now, the hotline number, again, it's 212-899-5567. Now, there is also a question regarding can a case against Dobbs be based upon the Establishment Clause? And that seems like much interpretation, correct? Right?
Well, I think that there has been a lot of hand wringing about, whether the right to abortion should have been landed in, the penumbra, in privacy, and or whether it should have been in equality, or frankly, I'll raise my hand for the 13th Amendment and involuntary servitude. I think that, or cruel and inhuman punishment. There are a lot of punishments that are that have been found to be inhuman, that are more than kind of co-opting a woman's body for 9 months. But I don't know that there is going to be a lot of purchase right now for those arguments, because eventually they will reach this court. And but I know that a lot of august constitutional scholars are thinking through, is there another way? In terms of the Establishment Clause, there has been a lawsuit that was brought by a Jewish congregation in Florida, of all things, against the Florida 15-week limit, saying that this interferes with the free exercise of the Jewish faith, which prioritizes the life and health, including mental health, of the mother. It's not clear where that is going to go on the, but this court seems to be quite indulgent of free exercise. Unfortunately, the Jewish faith is one of, Talmudic interpretation and a back and forth, and there's a lot of latitude, and you can't point to something that says, this is what my religion requires.
Now, if there is an opportunity to assist, will those opportunities be posted on the Attorney General's website or elsewhere?
They will be posted on the Attorney General's website. I also saw a question about training, which was something that we should have mentioned when we were talking about how the hotline works. Once we realized that there was going to be a need for this more individualized risk assessment, we worked with the ACLU and an organization called RAD and with Morrison and Forster to develop a training that we're going to be rolling out next week, specific to addressing risk assessment questions for providers in New York. So yes, but we'll be providing training.
And for everyone on the call, I did post that link to the AG's website. It's a direct link, so be sure to bookmark that page. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists immensely for your time here today, providing all of this useful information to us. And thank you for your work in this endeavor and for fighting this fight and for spearheading such an important task force.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to the New York State Bar Association for having us.
Yes, thank you all.
And just echoing Christina's statement, we would like to thank all of you participating in the program today. This does conclude our webinar. Please make sure to return to your My Learning dashboard and complete the course evaluation. Thank you for choosing New York State Bar Association programs. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you all, Claudia, Jennifer, Christina, you guys were fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you to our panelists. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. And we certainly hope that you will join us at our future programs and look for our future programs through the New York State Bar Association Women in Law section.
Thank you.
Thank you all.